Hello, my name is Karen Fitzgerald, and I'm the Jewish lay leader here at JBLM. We can be found at the Main Post Chapel Annex and on Facebook, JBLM Jewish Communities. Links are also available on First Court Chapel pages. And I hope everybody is continuing to do well. And now I'd like to do some summary of the readings for the week of 19 July. And the first thing I'd like to comment or mention is that on the Shabbat of this week, 25 July, it is called Shabbat Chazon. And it's the last Shabbat of the mourning period commemorating the destruction of the first and second Jerusalem temples. The mourning period ends with the fast of Tish B'Av on the 30th of July. This period has historically been days of misfortune and calamity for the Jewish people. And now I'd like to talk about this week's Torah portion, which is Devarim, or Deuteronomy, and it's the beginning of Deuteronomy 1 to 3.22. It is the first of the 11 that make up the fifth book of the Torah, known as Devarim, or Deuteronomy, from the opening words in Hebrew. This fifth book consists of Moses' farewell to Israel, delivered to the people at the end of his long assignment as their leader. He was soon to die, and he wanted to use his remaining strength to review its history for Israel, its special relationships with God, and its future as a united people. And then this week's Haftorah is from the book of Isaiah, 1.1 to 27. For nearly 40 years, Isaiah spoke God's message in the kingdom of Judah, which was about 740 to 701 BCE. During his time, the Middle East, of which his country was a small part, was going through many political changes. Assyria had become a mighty power, swallowing up weaker nations like Syria and the northern kingdom of Israel. With the northern kingdom gone, it was the responsibility of the kingdom of Judah alone to keep alive the people's faith in the one God. But could the Judeans succeed in that task? In the Haftorah, the prophet Isaiah criticizes the Judeans for their weaknesses. They have been like undependable children in their relationship with God. Even animals have more appreciation for those who have been good to them. The people of Judah have been guilty of great wrongdoings. For similar wrongs committed, their brothers of the northern kingdom had been punished. There is still time for the people of Judah to change their way of life. They must make religion a sincere experience. The bringing of animal sacrifice is hardly enough. God asks of them that they do justice, help the unfortunate, and improve the lives of all people. There is terrible dishonesty in the land. It must be cleared away. If they do not become righteous and decent among themselves, God will bring judgment against them, and their change for the better will be a hard process. Through punishment, they will come to be a good people again. And now I'd like to have Caleb come up, and he's going to give us a Devar Torah, and I hope everybody continues to do well and has a good week.
How you doing? My name is Caleb. I'm a Jewish member at the community here at JBLM. Today I'm going to talk overall in general about Moses and his final words. The book of Devarim, of course, which means words, is his final speech collected over what they understand to be approximately 2 weeks before his death. And this is where he goes up on Mount Nebo and Hashem himself buries him. And even to this day, nobody knows, of course, where he's buried. And one interesting thought on that is if you can imagine the most prominent person in all Judaism, of course it's Moshe Rabbeinu, and to know where he is, we would take mass pilgrimages there, and not just Jews, but of course Muslims and Christians. This site would become one of the most well-known, if not the most well-known site there is. And Hashem, in all his wisdom, decides maybe that this isn't the best idea. Maybe I don't want to explain where Moses is because I don't want you getting wrapped up in the person of who he is. I want you to get the understanding of what he taught, what he's about, what his foundation and his principles were. And I not to judge what God does, I'd say he probably made the right call on that one. And as a matter of fact, we kind of take that philosophy and we approach that with Pesach in our Haggadot. We never mention, at least in the Orthodox booklets, we never mention the name of Moshe. We'll say he went to Pharaoh and said, let my people go. And it's under the same idea that we don't want to worship somebody, a man who no matter what he did, is still a man. And I use this word strongly because in my house I try to teach it as being one of the most powerful words there is in the English language anyways, and it's the word just. Because when you throw that word in front of any direct object, it shrinks the value, minimalizes it to basically its lowest standard. So if you say he's just Moses, you just took the greatest prophet all Judaism has ever known and said he's absolutely nothing. He's just the president, it's just $1 million. You kind of get the philosophy that you can take whatever is actually valuable and shrink it down. So I love the idea of bolstering of Moshe to be somebody prominent while still understanding he is just a human being and he's just a man and he's faltered. But here we are with these 2 weeks, and he pours out as much history as he can, replaying his time. He gives more advice and expands and expounds upon the first 4 books, the Torah, and he goes into better detail. And it's so interesting as I would say one of his children, listening to him as a parent, listening to what he says compared to what he shared earlier took place. And one example of that would be in the 10 Devarim, in the 10 words, or the 10 prominent pillars of Judaism. And one of them is the Shabbat. In the book of Shemot, in Exodus, he says when God himself was speaking at Mount Sinai to the Jewish people, he says, Zukor et Yom HaShabbat lekodsho. You are to remember the Shabbat to keep it holy. And then in Deuteronomy, when it's just him and he's talking with the people, he doesn't say the same words. He actually changes it up a notch and he says, Zukor et Yom HaShabbat lekodsho. Shemor. You are to guard the Shabbat. Not remember it, but guard it. He changes God's very words that he said on Mount Sinai. He said in Exodus, God said that we are to remember it. But here I am telling you, replaying it, and I'm saying you have to guard it and observe it. Those are different. Those are very different things, and they promote different concepts. They promote different ideas. In the book of Exodus, he says, the reason why you keep the Shabbat is because God made the earth in 6 days. Now, we're actually just talking about it before. Is that a literal 6 days, or are those 6 days, could they be taken as millions of years? I'm going to let you decide however you choose to. But Moshe is trying to use that as an argument on why we're supposed to keep the Shabbat. That's what God told me in Exodus. This is why I'm sharing it with you. And yet in Deuteronomy, when he shares in the 10 commandments, in the 10 powerful words, he says, the reason why we keep the Shabbat is because Hashem, with a mighty hand, brought us out of Egypt. Totally different reason. Totally different reason, and it gives us a different perspective and a different understanding on why Jews are to keep the Shabbat. Is it from creation, or is it from him saving us from Egypt? Is it that we're supposed to remember it, or is that we're supposed to observe it? Those can promote different theories, different halakha in the way that we approach it. And the rabbis decide, okay, we have to come to some sort of agreement. We have to come to an understanding of what he meant when he said to shemor et Yom HaShabbat, to observe the Shabbat, versus to Zikor, to remember it. Why did he change it? And the observance comes to the conclusion that when God was at Mount Sinai, he said both words simultaneously, and we can understand that's why he wrote this here and this here. It's the best that we could come up with. It's our idea. And I would say, in just sharing an additional thought, is that sometimes we get lost. Gentleman who actually managed the camera for the last few weeks, I appreciate you. And what he had said was sometimes we get lost in the weeds. We get so wrapped up in the semantics, the details of what is right, what is wrong. Is it 6 days? Is it 16 million years? 6.4 billion years? Did Moshe change the commandments of God, or is he expanding the thought and the philosophy of it? I love this comedian. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he said, you want to know why Jews aren't allowed to celebrate Christmas? The reason why is because we would get lost in the argument of how the tree is supposed to be set up. Because if we can argue in Hanukkah over the size of the candles, how long the candles have to be burned, which direction do we start burning the candles on, what time of the day do we burn the candles, can you imagine the arguments, the pages that would be filled up coming to the size of a Christmas tree, the length of a Christmas tree, the height of a Christmas tree, the color of it, and all so on and so forth. We get so wrapped up in the arguments of the details, and that's beautiful, and I think that that's part of what Judaism is supposed to be. It's to care about the minor details, the minute details, because we want to show Hashem, ultimately, that we love him in all things that we do. The danger of that is what took place with Moses as well. When he's judging people and he's exhausted mentally, physically, where his father-in-law has said, you got to take a break. You got to take a break. Anytime you focus your attention on the details, it is mentally, physically, emotionally, and often spiritually exhausting. And so taking it to the parents' route, taking it to Moses' route, he himself, before he knew of the Torah, he had a love of God, and of course, God had a love of him. Before we became observant bar and bat mitzvah adults, God loved us, and we should have loved him for sure. We should absolutely love the details, but you can let go of all of that and have that assurance that God is still with you, that you still have a place with Hashem, and that he has a special connection that is completely different than what you do right, what you do wrong, and the arguments over ethics. And the best way to describe it is always in parenting. I tell my children all the time, I actually just told my 15-year-old, and I told my 20-year-old when he was 15, I have no problem with you arguing with me. I have no problem with you coming and having ethics battles with me, so to speak, on why I should let you stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning kind of thing. But if you come telling me that Bob's parents said so, that's idol worship. You're telling me another God lets me do this, so I want to do this. I want you to grab the scriptures and use it intelligently, and if you prove me wrong, so be it. I'm a human being. I'm just trying my best. We'll change it, and I'd like to believe I've adapted a little bit over time. It's interesting to look at adults as a whole, as Judaism as a whole, and say, how have they been very successful? It's very interesting because when you look in a synagogue and you see the children running under chairs and the parents are on the other side of the synagogue, part of me is like, man, go get your kids. But there's something transpiring in that kid's mind, even as they're diving and jumping over chairs. They're listening at their own level. To have them sit in the chair and say, be quiet, you must listen, you must focus, it's not in the child. They're not going to absorb it the way that they should. They're not going to take it. It'll become a rebellious situation. So let them absorb it and understand it in their own ways. Right? So what we then begin to see as they become adults, there's a reason why Jews have so many lawyers and doctors. It's not just the stereotype, business owners, because you let the children become spoiled early, they become focused later. The idea is, it's beautiful in its growth, is that treat a child like a child and don't manage them like adults. What we find a lot of times is the more discipline thrown upon the child, sometimes the child rebels later in life. They want to live that spoiled childlike life later, and the rebellion happens, and then it takes till they're 40 years old and they're kicking themselves, made a whole bunch of mistakes. Let them get their childish ways out as a kid. Let them run under the chairs. Let them do their things. Let them grow naturally. Let them argue, and rather than ever saying, because I've never read in any scriptures where Hashem himself looks down and says, this is my wisdom, shut up and do it. There's always understandings. There's always room for conversation. There's always room to have your own thoughts and come to your own conclusions. And as Moshe uses the word, I want you to observe, even though on Mount Sinai he said to remember, I'm only doing it to give you the best philosophy, to give you the best understanding. And so as parents, as God does, I'm willing to restate things differently to help you understand. We should do the same for our parents or for our children. And as children, always be open towards your parents, listen to them, but at the same time, have your own thoughts. It's a beautiful thing. And whether you choose to zikor, shamor, guard, or observe, at the end of the day, they're both the same thing. He truly does have a broader understanding, so we don't get lost in the weeds. He wants us more on the mountaintops. So as always, Shavua Tov, have a good week, and I think we will see you next week.